Hi guys, I am Sierra Lesnik, and I was a Valor student on 5 East this summer. And I currently go to Washington State University Spokane, and that is why I am doing this presentation through a video instead of being there in person with the rest of you. So I apologize for having to do this through a video. I really wish I could be there. I really wish I was there presenting with the rest of you, but I know the rest of you got this. And I cannot wait to hear about everyone's presentation and how it all went. So on that note, I will go ahead and get started with talking about my patient education piece. So my patient education piece was centered around CPAP education. I focused on this mostly because I saw a need for education in myself. I had a few patients who were on CPAP, and I felt like I could not adequately address their questions about CPAP, why they were on it, why they may or may not be on it, why they are compliant or not. And I felt in myself I could not be the best nurse I could be if I didn't know why my patients were or weren't on CPAP and I couldn't answer their questions. And I know that we have respiratory therapy, and they are the main people who come in and kind of, focus on CPAP and any respiratory issues, and they kind of take care of that. But I also saw a need in the sense of discharges because I actually came across a patient who had a few questions about their CPAP and had some questions about how it was working, and apparently something was just off on it. And we had to call respiratory therapy, and it prolonged the discharge just because we had to wait on them. And it turned out to be a pretty easy fix, something that I think I could have even figured out and told the patient if I had just known. It wasn't anything major, it was just a little bit of education that they needed. And because I lacked that, it also prolonged their discharge. And I think I needed to do this project not only from a nursing perspective, but also putting myself in my patient's shoes and establishing kind of more of that trust relationship that I know what I'm talking about when they have a question. And also for the hospital, if we can shorten discharges and get more patients out of here, that's just looks way better on us. So I really focused in on CPAP, and I did this using a brochure. And I found this brochure online. It is a VA established brochure that was done by nurses and established people all over the US, and we did not have this brochure, so I used it, and it is really great. It has questions about CPAP. It has basically just general why you're on CPAP, what it's used for, what's the benefits, and then it also brought up challenges that our vets face when using CPAP, and I thought that was a really great tool because it makes it more personalized to our patients because they are vets, and it kind of relates to them. And a lot of the questions were actually questions that I had been asked already and I didn't know the answer. And using this brochure, I was able to talk to more patients in a more professional and confident way, and it really helped establish that trust relationship a little bit more. So I decided that my main point of entry through this project was going to be through the nurses, because I figured if the nurses had the more of that education, they would be able to better get that to our patients, because patients learn the most from us. We're the ones who have that relationship with them. We're the ones who know why they're compliant or why they're not compliant. We're the people who know why they're using it, what the medical condition is. We're the people who know everything about our patients. And so that was my main focus. And I know it was a different route than I think some people took, and it was definitely a harder route, I found out at the end. But I decided to just tackle it and, give it a go. It kind of worked. Kind of. So there were basically two parts to my project. The first part was just staff education, and I thought that was going to be really easy. I researched a lot on CPAPs. I spent a few days doing research and just kind of figuring out, what are the basics of CPAP? What are the basic settings? What are more common reasons people don't use it? What are issues patients have with CPAPs? What's the difference between a CPAP and a BiPAP? And just kind of figuring out what people wanted to know about CPAPs. And I was going to focus in on the staff. And then I was going to actually give out my brochure that I made to the patients. And I was going to give it to the nurses, they look it over, and then, the next day they give it to their patient. And then they can kind of talk it out, figure it out, just have that conversation with the patient of why don't you use your CPAP. And that was kind of my whole goal of all of this, was just to be able to even have that conversation and just to get that brochure out there, because the brochure was actually one of the best tools I have ever come across personally. And I really think that since I was the one educating, if I would want this brochure, so would my patients. So my plan for implementing basically was, during huddle, I would give little blurbs, probably 3 minutes, of just the information that I found and researched, and just kind of talk to my staff. Huddle is day shift and night shift on my floor, so it would reach a lot of the staff. And I was working different days, so I was going to hit different people on the staff, and it was going to be great. And it turned out that week that Joint Commission was here. So everyone's minds were kind of focused on Joint Commission, and so was Huddle. And Huddle lasted a lot longer because Joint Commission was here, and I never actually got the chance to go up and, give my spiel. And I truly think that even if I did, people probably wouldn't have been as focused on it because they were so engrossed with Joint Commission being there and having that stress on top of an already stressful job and day. I didn't really want to implement that. So I decided to take an alternate route. And with the alternate route, it was more personal education. So what I decided to do was go up to nurses individually and offer them education. So because I started school, my project was cut short about 2.5 weeks. So I really focused in on nurses who had CPAPs, and my preceptor helped me with this and helped me identify the nurses who had patients with CPAP. And I kind of went up to them, gave them my brochure, and said, hey, if you have a patient with CPAP, go ahead, look this over, and then give it to your patient, and just have that conversation of, we have this tool, we would love you to use it, and if you have questions, please come talk to me, and I have this education piece for you. And I was going to educate the nurses, and it worked a little bit. The second part of my implementation was actually going to the patients. So then it was taking the brochure into patients' rooms and talking to them, and especially the non-compliant patients. The compliant patients, yes, I brought the brochure in, had the conversation, but they already kind of knew why they were on it, what they needed it for, and why it was good for them, and they didn't need a ton of education. But the non-compliant patients, I went in and we talked, and they actually really liked the brochure. They really loved that I had questions. They really loved that I was relatable to vets and more personalized, and a lot of them had similar questions that were on the brochure. And I think the brochure itself was a huge hit, and it was one of the most successful parts of my project. I think the biggest challenge that I did come across, though, was the staff education, even though I thought it was going to be the easiest. I was trying to hit the staff while they were busy, and on top of that, already a very stressful week. And even though they had said they'd wanted CPAP education, I think when it actually comes down to it, it's harder to get the motivation to relearn something you already learned at one point. Even for myself, when I was researching it, I was kind of, at first, a little glazed over while reading about it because I'd already learned about it. And I already knew the basics. Why would I want to relearn anything about that? So the staff were very willing to give the brochure to their patients. They just themselves were not willing as much to get the education piece that I prepped. And, that's fine. That's how it goes. And they got to talk to their patients more, and they actually had something to give to their patients, which at the end of the day was all that I cared about. I set the brochure on our education table that we have, and by the end of the day, when I had left, I would say probably 6 were taken already. And that was a good number. That was within one day, and I loved that. One of our staff members themselves were on a CPAP, and they weren't compliant, and they took it, and he came up to me and said, I really appreciate you doing this. I really have been trying to figure out, why I need to use my CPAP, and I just really like that you did this project. So that was a really cool thing. Patient education, went kind of the way I figured it would. The compliant ones were very willing to talk about. The non-compliant ones, they were fine talking until I told them, hey, you should use a CPAP. And then it was kind of, well, I have my ways. I've been doing this for years, and I'm not going to change now. I do like this piece, and that's just kind of the way it went. I think the biggest reward that came out of this was those patients never left those brochures in their room. They took them home with them, as far as I know, unless they threw them in the trash. But I think a lot of the patients did utilize the brochures, which was all that I really cared about at the end of the day. Because if they can even have that piece of education, maybe they'll pick it up and maybe they'll read something they didn't know before. So if there was no constraint on time, I think time was my biggest enemy in this project, because not only was my time personally cut short, but the weeks that I had to do it, it was just bad weeks to try and educate staff. And this project, I think all of our projects were pretty long term, but especially this project, I wish that I could have measured more. Brochure, like the amount of brochures I have versus at the beginning of the day versus the end of the day, and then potentially seeing how many times respiratory had to be called and seeing if it was lower than the number, a couple months back, or seeing if any nurses themselves felt like they were more educated. And I wish that this could be almost a year-long project and I could track that, because I think it would be really cool to see how successful this truly was, or if I needed to go about this in a different way. I also think it would have been really cool if I could have had a staff survey, not a patient survey, because I think patient education and how well this was performed could be seen even if they come back. If a patient comes back and maybe they're using their CPAP now or whatever, I think that would have been really an amazing thing to see. And I think staff education wise, I really would have loved to have been able to create a survey and, see if they actually learned anything and see if they actually got anything out of it. So that is my presentation on CPAPs. Thank you so much for listening. Again, everyone, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Good luck on the rest of your projects, and I will hopefully see you guys soon.